Before we begin, please note that the topic we're about to explore may not be suitable for our young listeners.
Oh, gosh. Let me tell you something. I've been on so many bad dates. I don't even know what to do. I've been on a date so bad, I started a marriage. That's how many bad dates I've been on. My prom date was a gay guy with one eye. I don't even know his name. He ditched me to go to Chili's. I don't even know how that could happen.
The first second I go to meet him, I just knew, like, oh my gosh, I hate you. I hate you so much. And it wasn't because it was winter and he was wearing flip-flops with jeans. That wasn't the only reason, but it was the main reason. And
I'm the guy that on the Houston dating scene, you're supposed to recognize and go, swipe left. Like, walk away.
This guy still has the nerve. As I called the elevator, he leaned over and kissed me. I was like, ew, you had a sandwich with onions at the restaurant. The nerve.
At the end of the lunch, we stood up. She kissed me on the cheek. That was a home run for me. And she said, one day, you're gonna make some lucky girl a fantastic boyfriend. And at 13 years old, that was magic to my ears. And 2 years later, when I went out on my first date, I was filled with confidence because Barbie Benton said I passed the test.
When I got out of my truck and I walked toward her, she started walking toward me. And then she started running toward me. And then she dropped my leather jacket and reared back with her large white hand. She smacked me across the face. And then she landed the first one, and then she tried to land another one, and then she gave me the old knee to the crotch, and she was perfect height for it. And it got really bad. I didn't know what to do. I was terrified, and so I tried to grab her and pull her in close so she couldn't get, that motion with her long arms. And I think her mom must have heard my screams and thought they were hers. I hopped in my truck. I sped down their driveway to safety with my leather jacket and every white girl everywhere in my rearview mirror. And I never looked back.
So that's me, Eric Huffman, talking about the only serious relationship that I ever had in high school and the only white girl I ever dated before meeting my wife, Giovanna, when I was just 18 years old. Last month, my church gathered singles from all over Houston to talk about sex and dating and romance and relationships.
I haven't had a date since 1979. And
to break the ice on that first night, we invited people to open up about their funniest and cringe-worthiest and most heartbreaking dating and relationship stories. And spending 4 nights with a room full of single people confirmed what I'd been sensing for a while. The dating scene in 2019 is a cruel and confusing place.
They feel undercut by other women on the dating scene who don't have those same boundaries. And so the pressure is on to compromise your values to try and keep a man's attention.
And it doesn't seem to be getting any better, even though single adults make up more than half of America's total population.
From me and a lot of my friends, those guys that send pictures that they shouldn't be and really are off-putting to a lot of women make us a little more reserved, and we're not as self-confident because we just kind of expect that's what we're seen as. We're not all out there just trying to get in your pants. We do want emotional connections, not just these random hookups.
If dating as we know it isn't working for most of us, if, as we'll suggest in this episode, dating is doing more harm than good, then what needs to change? How should single people be searching for the one? That's today on Maybe God.
I'm indifferent.
I don't believe in God.
To the existence of
God is not judging them.
I don't have proof.
I don't know how to pray.
They're judging themselves.
Where is God in all of this? This is my home.
God exists.
What does it say about God that he created the orgasm?
I don't pledge allegiance to anything.
I don't pray.
Only to God.
If there was a God.
And I thought,
I just have this understanding that life is hard.
He could never love me after this.
God is still good.
You're listening to Maybe God, I'm Eric Huffman. Hello there, Maybe God listeners. Thank you for joining us today. I've just been in awe of how quickly this podcast has been growing. We now have listeners in over 40 countries worldwide, and we're seeing around 1,000 new listeners every week. If you're one of those, I want to say especially to you, welcome to Maybe God. All this growth has happened with very little promotion on our end. It's almost 100% thanks to you, our loyal listeners, who are sharing this podcast with your friends and your family, coworkers. Thank you so much. And just please keep sharing. Please keep writing your reviews on iTunes so more and more people can find out about Maybe God. Your passion for this podcast motivates us to work even harder. And we are just so grateful. Okay, so let's get started. Today's topic is something that I have very little personal experience with. And honestly, knowing what I now know about the state of the dating scene, I'm so relieved that I met my wife at 18. And I never had to create a Tinder profile or try and pick some girl up at a bar. I don't think I would last a day in that world. Now, because I'm a pastor, people often feel comfortable sharing their most personal stories with me. Sometimes I actually wish I knew a little bit less than I know about what's going on out there, or a lot less. I honestly think that single people in my church are struggling more than any other group. Statistically, fewer adults are getting married than ever before, and the ones who are getting married are waiting longer to wed than every other generation before them has waited. But that doesn't mean that the desire for marriage and family and kids, that it's going away. That drive is just as strong as ever. Most single people that I know walk through the world feeling incomplete, like they're missing a piece of themselves. And that part is what wrecks me, because I believe that everybody is created in the image of God and as a whole person. And the Bible never says that love and marriage is what makes us complete. Strictly speaking, marriage in the New Testament is only for those of us who aren't strong enough to not sleep around. And so the push toward romance and this idolization of marriage and family, that's not biblical. That's cultural. And it's making single people feel like their lives are on hold until they meet the one and walk down the aisle. And almost without fail, one of the first questions out of a married person's mouth whenever we see a single friend is, "So, are you seeing anyone yet?" And surely we can do better than that. So this episode isn't just for single people. We all have our work cut out for us to fundamentally change the conversation around dating and sex and marriage. But first, let's paint a better picture of what it's like today for singles. If you haven't dated in a while, you might not realize that 40 million Americans now use online dating platforms like Match and Tinder, Bumble and Christian Mingle. It's been estimated that adults 18 to 30 spend about 10 hours a week on these apps and websites. Maybe God producer Julie M. is here with our first story about a Tinder date gone wrong. Hey, Julie.
Hey, Eric.
So what is it that you have for us today?
Well, this first story comes to us from my favorite New York Times column of all time called Modern Love. I've been reading it since I was a single myself living in New York City.
So you were single in New York City. So which one were you during that time?
Which one was I?
I mean, yeah, were you a Carrie, a Samantha, a Charlotte, a Miranda?
You're kidding, right?
I mean, everyone's a something. I'm a Carrie.
Oh my gosh, of course you are. But anyway, so Modern Love is all real stories about romance and relationships, but they're not just a bunch of happy love stories. It's real life stuff. And so last summer, I was reading this crazy story about a Tinder romance gone wrong. And, you know, the more we worked on this episode, the more I thought back to it and thought how it's really an extreme but totally symbolic example of what so many people are putting up with these days on the dating apps. So I started chatting back and forth with the author of the piece over email, and I didn't realize it at first, but she's actually a well-known actress who played one of the most loved characters on the hit CW series Gossip Girl for 6 seasons. Have you seen it, Eric?
I have not. It's not a favorite of mine.
The show actually revolves around the lives of several super privileged teens who live on the Upper East Side of Manhattan and involves its own fair share of relationship sagas.
So we have to start from the beginning and talk about Dorota.
Yes.
Actress Zuzanna Szadkowski played Dorota on Gossip Girl, a countess from Poland who escaped her arranged marriage by moving to the U.S. and becoming the housekeeper and closest confidant of wealthy teenager Blair Waldorf, played by Leighton Meester.
The quintessential thing was just the way I would say all their names. I would say Miss Blair, Mr. Chuck, Miss Serena.
Zuzanna was 28 years old when she landed the role playing the Waldorf's lovable and strange maid.
This world of Gossip Girl was so glamorous, and all of these characters were so, fabulous Upper East Side young people, but just like glammed out to the most degree. And then here is Dorota, this like downstairs housekeeper. I think that the appeal was that she was kind of like the moral center of the show in a way, because she was the kind of mother figure, maternal figure. She always came from a place of love and protecting her charge, Blair.
Every girl fantasizes about finding her Prince Charming. But if that prince refuses to come...
You are late. Time for breakfast.
I'll be down in a minute. I just have to finish something. A girl has to take matters into her own hands.
Don't forget, God always watching, Miss Blair.
Did people always assume that you had that accent in real life?
Oh, always. And so that's the one thing is whenever I meet fans in the world, the first and foremost thing on everyone's mind is that they thought I was really that was my real voice, which is a nice compliment because I was working hard to represent my Polish people because, I was born in Poland and I came to the US when I was 3, but my parents had thick accents and I'm fluent in Polish, but to be on screen and to pass as a 100% Pole I was very proud of that.
Just like Dorota, Zuzanna was raised Roman Catholic by her Polish parents. Her mom and dad took a lot of pride in the fact that Zuzanna was born on the day that Pope John Paul II, a Polish man, delivered his first speech.
Aprite, anzi spalancate le porte a Cristo, alla sua salvatrice potestà.
But unlike Dorota, Zuzanna left her childhood religion behind when she moved out of her parents' house. Today, the actress describes herself as an atheist with slight Buddhist inclinations. Zuzanna's love life was also very different from Dorota's. In season 3 of Gossip Girl, the housekeeper married an Upper East Side Russian doorman named Vanya.
What do you love most about Dorota?
Oh, this is a tough question. There's so many things I love about her.
We had this huge wedding with like tons of extras, and there's an ice sculpture of us and like all this stuff. So it was really fun because I got to have this big grand wedding, as Dorota.
Zuzanna has never experienced that big, grand wedding in real life. She did have a boyfriend the entire time she acted in Gossip Girl, but she says she put that relationship on autopilot. She put all of her effort into acting and very little effort into her boyfriend. So when both the show and that relationship ended in 2012, she found herself single in her mid-30s and learning how to date in a totally different world.
I remember the first time somebody showed me the Tinder app and I was like, what? You swipe at the people? And like, it was so crazy. I would never do that. But then after a little while, I was like, I want to go on dates. And so that was, to me, the only option I could see. And so I signed up and started. What shocked me the most, I think, is the lack of like respect for each other. If I were to meet somebody in real life, like, let's say at the supermarket, and then we were to go on a date, it's like, I feel like there would immediately be a sense of humanity between us because we like met on a playing field as two humans. So I think that if one person wasn't interested in the other, would say thank you, or like, that was fun, but I don't want to do it again. So, some kind of just a person-to-person basic level of respect. And I think, in the dating apps, what's amazing is because you're playing the field with like 5 people at once you don't have a use for somebody, you drop them in this way that has, no sense of like caring about each other in a social way. So it's like you really lose your trust in other people's humanity really quickly when you're on these apps.
Zuzanna said she was looking for a man with a great sense of humor and lots of passion for his work, similar to her passion for acting. Although on her dating profiles, she made sure never to mention her role as Dorota.
I think I'm much kind of like sexier, more youthful, more flirty than a Dorota type character. So I really didn't want potential dates Googling me and finding like an old Polish housekeeper. And so I didn't lead with that at all.
But she did make it very clear on her profiles that she wasn't just looking for hookups. She was dating to find a long-term boyfriend.
I matched with this guy, James, and he was cute. And then we wrote a little bit and he was kind of funny. So I met him, and then the minute he got there, I thought, oh, he was really funny and like open, and he was really responsive to me. Like I could tell he like really liked me, and there's a kind of nice thing about that. And so we started just dating, and the thing is, it was like a lot really fast. It's like once he was in my life, it's like he didn't leave for a week.
James told Zuzanna that he worked in real estate, which is why he had a very flexible schedule and lots of time to spend with her. He was in between apartments too, living with friends who needed help with their baby while he planned his next move. That's why they'd spend time at her place during their 13-day relationship, and that's where they had sex for the first time.
He started saying like, I love you to me, and I remember like laughing and being like, that's crazy. You can't say that to somebody. And he's like, oh, you love me too. And I was like, no, but it was like all kind of lighthearted, but it was also super intense. One of my best girlfriends lives close by in my neighborhood, and she and her husband wanted to have dinner. So I was like, well, I'll bring James, and then they can get a look at him or whatever. And the dinner was fine. And my friend Jill thought she was like, he's so affectionate. He's so into you, And I'm not like the most affectionate person. Like I'm not super huggy. And so she kind of thought it was funny because I was like getting all kissied on the whole time. After that dinner is when he told me that he had something that he needed to tell me. I had a very dark feeling. I was like, what is this going to be? Because he seemed really serious about it. And he told me, he said, what I'm going to tell you is going to change everything. I brought him back to my house for the conversation, and we were sitting on the couch, and then he basically said, everything that I've told you used to be true, but it's not true anymore. So I used to be a real estate agent. I used to live in my friend's apartment, and I don't have a job and I don't have a home. In fact, I live in a men's shelter. My very first thing I said in response was, but you have so many shoes. And that's truly what I said, because it was the first visual that came into my mind, because there were no external signs to me that he was homeless, because he always was fashionable. He did have a different pair of shoes on almost every time I saw him. So I had this weird confusion at first. And it was crazy because it was like I was sitting with a person that I had some familiarity with. And it's like he changed in front of my eyes with somebody that was, I became suddenly, felt like I had been a victim of like a home invasion. I immediately felt like, first hit was like this weird fear and like I felt violated. And then the second hit I had was I felt great empathy toward him, because I was like, oh, he's a mess. He's a person has nothing and he's like suffering. And so I immediately felt like a great surge of like wanting to be kind to him and wanting to like care for him in the moment. So I had this really strange back and forth, because I wanted him out and I wanted to like scream and get him out, but I also didn't want him to be hurt. So I was doing a lot of like weird double talk, and it wasn't until I kind of got him out of my house then I basically said, oh, I have stuff to do. Like he left, and I basically like shut the door, and what occurred to me later is that I actually think it was more than just dishonesty. I think how he was actually using me. Like I believe that he was at a really lost in his life and he needed someone to help him. Like he needed a place to stay. He needed food to eat and stuff. And the thing was, it's not like that guy doesn't deserve to date and to have love and to be in someone's life. It's just that you have to fix the homelessness before you start the Tindering. You know what I mean? Like that's like fundamentally like where, so then because of that, it became clear to me that he was using Tindering to fix his homelessness.
Zuzanna never saw James again. He tried to work his way back into her life, asking repeatedly over text message to see her again. But Zuzanna made it very clear that their relationship was over. What wasn't over was this new trend in her dating life.
I started to think of it in terms of like that I'm a walking, talking, Tindering lifeboat, that these guys are like on Tinder and they see me and they like jump on to save themselves.
Shortly after she kicked James out of her apartment, at 36 years old, she met Carlos. She didn't feel an instant connection to him, and their personalities just weren't a great match. She admits she even found him boring, but he was smart. At the time, he was a PhD student and seemed nice enough to deserve a chance.
I went on several dates with him, and they were all kind of the same and a little bit boring, but I was trying it. And then he just disappeared. So I was like, okay, that happens. You know, that's how people deal with each other in this internet dating world. Just rude, you know, totally ignoring. And then like 2 weeks later, he came back around. He texted me and wanted to have a date. And I thought, okay, but I'll just, you know, say hi to him, but I'll kind of explain that I don't want to continue. And so we sat down in the park, and within the first 10 minutes of conversation, he basically asked me if I wanted to be his girlfriend. And I thought, so weird. I was like, I don't know you at all. And I haven't talked to you for 2 weeks. And like, what do you, so I was kind of laughing it off. And I said, that's not very reasonable. Like, no, I don't. And then maybe, you know, a little bit later in the conversation, he said, you know, I'm really sorry that I was out of touch for 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, you know, I tried to kill myself, and my roommate found me, and so he caught it just in time and called 911, and they were able to resuscitate me. And, you know, but because of that, I was on a 2-week psych hold, so that's why I wasn't able to call. And I was sitting there and I was like aghast, and he said, please don't feel sorry for me. And a part of me wanted to say, like, I don't even feel that sorry for you because I don't know you. I just feel scared. It just hit me so clearly that I was somehow, for this guy, I was like a beacon of safety, or I was a lifeboat yet again. Like, I think I walked away from that one being, you know, really reevaluating the fact that I had like basically twice in a row now had a guy who needed me for dear life, but it was not about me at all, you know. So it was eye-opening.
Zuzanna's story doesn't end there. We'll hear more in just a bit. But while her Tinder nightmares might seem a little over the top, they're actually on par with a lot of what the people I know are experiencing on dating apps all the time. The catfishing, the ghosting, the severe deception, that's all very real, and it's all very common. In a recent survey, 53% of people who use dating apps admitted to lying on their profiles. It's not uncommon to find people who are in serious relationships, even married people, on these dating apps. About 1/3 of Tinder users in the United States are in long-term relationships.
Hey, how are you doing?
I decided to spend an evening hearing first-hand dating stories from singles in the trenches. First, by drinking wine with a group of single women, ranging from age 24 to 36, all of whom go to my church.
Hi, everybody. This is not awkward at all. I've never been more terrified.
And then having a beer with a group of mostly single guys who helped me experience a dating app for the first time in my life.
So what do I do here? So I'm seeing a bunch of girls.
Are you on the Discover tab?
Yeah, he's on Discovered. How do you feel about Asian girls? Because she really likes you.
So everything I heard mostly confirmed what I believed to be true about dating, that most dating that's happening is happening through apps like Tinder, Bumble, OkCupid, and all the rest.
70%? Yeah, I'd say definitely the majority.
Over half of the weddings that I officiate these days are for couples who met online. So it's not surprising that the online dating industry is doing quite well. They're generating about $2.5 billion in revenue each year in the United States alone. But what's strange to me is how no one seems to like these apps. Tinder started as an experiment in college fraternity and sorority houses. It was designed in Silicon Valley, not to find your perfect match, but to hook you to the app with the same techniques used by slot machines in Las Vegas. Tinder wants you to become addicted to swiping left and swiping right. Now, let's just be clear. The makers of these apps don't benefit when you find the one and live happily ever after. They profit most when you aren't finding the one, but you're too hooked to the process of swiping that you can't walk away. But in the 21st century, online dating has become a necessary evil for just about everyone who wants to find the one.
I think that it's so convenient. Like right now, I'm not on any apps, and then I won't have a date for a while, and so then I'm like, well, I guess I need to get back on one, and then I'm on it for like a week. I'm like, yep, hate this, I'm off again.
Really?
I think it's tiring for a lot of people too to go on first dates like over and over and over, and there's no real connections, and it's just not working out, and it just gets frustrating after a while.
It's exhausting.
Yeah.
Back to my first time swiping on someone else's app, of course. What's crazy is how quickly it feels so natural to judge a potential date simply on one picture.
This would be a no for
You
me.
can click on her.
She looks high maintenance.
They all do. Let's take a picture from.
It's really amazing how the littlest things, like who took the profile picture and where was it taken, it all becomes an indicator of whether or not you could spend the rest of your life with this person.
What are the deal breakers when you're looking at a guy's profile?
And they have their shirt off.
If they have their shirt
I don't like gym
off.
selfies.
Bathroom selfies, like bye.
If they have a shirt off in the bathroom?
Yeah.
Selfies are creepy too.
Wait.
In cats.
You just said you take selfies.
But that's different. I'm a girl.
Oh. A guy who takes selfies is weird?
Yeah. It was like all selfies, yeah.
What about information? Height or weight or like anything?
They're like an atheist. Yeah.
If they're an atheist, you're out.
Yeah, sure. Same. Or agnostic. I'm like,
You're agnostic about the agnostics?
Binging Netflix. If she writes that as like one of her interests, I'm like, you're probably not my person.
That's a deal breaker?
Yeah.
I could never be the one for you, Daniel.
Girls that are posting pics at the gym.
Wait, that's a bad thing?
That's a huge bad thing.
Why?
Pics at the gym in full makeup, you're going to the gym to work out. Like, why do you need to make up? You know?
Right. I like the not looking at the camera. Like, someone's taking a picture out here and like you're gazing off into the wilderness and you're clearly like setting this up. Like the Instagram photos.
I think the best thing you can do is just have pictures where you're just organic with friends.
Right.
Like a lot of friends, family pictures are great.
Yeah.
Right.
They're just real. They're you.
Wow, this is intense. I didn't realize how complicated this could get for you.
Oh, it's so complicated.
I'm starting to think it's a miracle that anyone ever goes on a first date. Forget about getting married, with the way that single people are scrutinizing profile pictures on dating apps. I'm also not surprised to hear that the first in-person meetups are even more intensely scrutinized, especially by the ladies. Sorry, ladies.
he wanted to hold my hand during church. I'm like, I'm not a hand holder. And then afterwards, he was silent and mad at me. He told me I was the worst girlfriend he ever had, and he had never felt so distant from me. And I was like, but we met yesterday. So I go, only thing he talks about is cats. He has many cats, like at least 5, all female, and he calls them crotchety old ladies. And I'm just sitting there like, I need so much wine for this. So he's showing me the cats. I'm like, do y'all want to order? I'm like, I'm actually, no, I'm not. And I left.
He goes, hey, so I found out my roommate's really good friends with your ex-boyfriend. I was like, are you serious? And he was like, yeah, my roommate said you're a really big bitch and that you have a lot of food allergies and it'd be really hard to date you. I was like, that's a good way to start the date off, but okay. And
what is that? I matched with this guy and we were talking for like, I don't know, a week. And all of a sudden I just get a picture of his private part. And I'm like, hey, I'm actually not into that or looking for that, take care. And he's
just like out of the blue, he just dropped
out of the
it
blue,
on you.
yeah. And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, you just sent me a picture of your private part. And he's like, no, it wasn't me. And I had all my friends investigate, and you could tell his hand was the same hand, but he blamed it on his hand. His hand is in there. But the best part was that the following Sunday, I'm serving communion, and guess who I see walking up?
Oh, no.
And he looked at me and just like turned the other way, and I was like, you better, because I'm not giving you communion.
I'm not saying those hands don't deserve the body of Christ.
It's really weird.
Sidebar on this then. You get the dick pic. Are you done?
Yeah.
100%?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Yep, you just heard me right. A pastor just said dick pic. One of the hazards of having a young congregation is that they don't hold back. Once I did a series of sermons in church about dating, and when I asked single people to let me know what frustrates them most about people of the opposite sex, I received maybe a half dozen screenshots from women that showed these guys they've never met making advances and then sending pics of their private parts to total strangers, completely unsolicited. I guess you could say that I've become desensitized to it, just like many of these women have. I've rarely heard a single woman say that she's never gotten one of those pictures. But what some of these women do with those pictures might surprise you, especially if you're one of the guys who sends them.
No one ever wants that photo.
And all we do is show all of our friends and laugh.
I airdrop it in public all the time.
Oh, wow.
I think it's hilarious.
Okay. That's right, they airdrop them in coffee shops, airports, any public place where some unsuspecting stranger might access it.
One guy, big mistake, sent it to me with his face in it, which was the dumbest thing in life. Like, I think everyone I know has seen it. Because it's the funniest thing ever. And he's like, well, look at this idiot. You clearly have zero idea what we want, except for comedic relief.
Right. But maybe if they knew
Yeah.
that it's getting airdropped.
The airport is the best. That's my favorite part to do that.
The what?
The airport.
Oh.
It's very fun. I'd be sitting and then watch who gets it. It's very funny.
Oh, man. This is going to end dick pics forever. I've spent more time than I'd like to admit trying to understand why in the world men send these pictures. Is it a need for attention? Is it about validation? Is it a cry for help? Are we no better than baboons at the zoo who present themselves to the opposite sex before procreating together? I tried confronting our group of young single guys, hoping that someone there might enlighten me.
Do people actually do that? Oh.
They actually told me that any of y'all that said you haven't done it are lying. I'm not naming names here.
I don't know
just
one
saying.
person that, I guess all my friends are lying.
They're not sending them to you.
Maybe I'm naive, but I actually believe these guys when they tell me that they're not the ones sending these kinds of pictures. They were genuinely upset by how other men online are ruining it for them.
Because they damage women, and that kind of is what's understood that goes on.
Unfortunately, I think the guys who have like a longer term mindset, it is kind of an anomaly. Mm-hmm. Like we're just being outnumbered in a way.
It's I'm getting a sense of how hard this is, because the sense is with guys that don't want to get in a girl's pants, like what's weird about the him? Like why doesn't he want to get in her pants? That kind of thing. And so it's a catch-22.
Yeah, I think there is an issue with men not knowing exactly how to be men.
That's highly confusing for people, especially guys that are trying to be good guys. Mm-hmm. Because there's no real model for that anymore. Mm-hmm. That used to mean a certain set of things. Like you respectfully approached a woman you were interested in. You invited her out after a date or two. You met her parents. Then you asked her to go steady. And it's like this whole progression of stuff that you took the lead on. And now with the toxic masculinity stuff, guys are hesitant to be too forward. And then I hear a lot of criticism from women about men who aren't forward enough.
Mm-hmm. I wish so much there was just a clear set of rules and guidelines to follow. My goodness, even if they were boring and tedious, just instructions, just please.
Yeah. Ironically, there's nothing that will show a man and lead a man to be a better man than a really great woman who sort of shepherds and loves him into that.
Psychologist Barry Schwartz has had a woman shepherding him for the past 5 decades.
I met my wife in junior high school. We paired up in high school, and we've been married for 52 years.
Wow.
So this is not exactly a typical romantic biography these days.
I think it's highly romantic.
Barry's not surprised that his story is an anomaly today. And he thinks he knows exactly why people are having a harder and harder time choosing a mate.
Although choice is good, there can be too much of a good thing.
In 2004, Barry broke ground when he released his book, The Paradox of Choice: Why Less is More.
All of this choice has 2 effects. One effect, paradoxically, is that it produces paralysis rather than liberation. With so many options to choose from, people find it very difficult to choose at all.
Since 2005, over 13 million people have watched his TED Talk on the paradox of choice.
Even if we manage to overcome the paralysis and make a choice, we end up less satisfied with the result of the choice than we would be if we had fewer options to choose from. And there are several reasons for this. One of them is that with a lot of different salad dressings to choose from, if you buy one and it's not perfect, and you know what salad dressing is, it's easy to imagine that you could have made a different choice that would have been better. And what happens is this imagined alternative induces you to regret the decision you made, and this regret subtracts from the satisfaction you get out of the decision you made, even if it was a good decision. The more options there are, the easier it is to regret anything at all that is disappointing about the option that you chose. Second,
the book is 15 years old, and by my lights, the problem has only grown since then, thanks largely to sort of digital transformation of society. There aren't even costs anymore associated with going to multiple stores because you never have to leave your living room couch to do that.
Right.
So now the choice set is close to infinite.
You always have this fear in your mind. There's some better deal out there somewhere. If you can just search hard enough in the right places, you'll find it.
It's exactly right. And there's work that I've done with a former student of mine that isn't published yet that shows something I think quite interesting and important. And that is when the choice set is limited, the choice you make doesn't say much to yourself or the world about who you are. So to take a concrete example, if the only jeans available are Lee's and Levi's, which you buy is sort of irrelevant to who you are because there isn't enough variety out there. When there are 2,000 kinds of jeans, well, now all of a sudden, it's not just about covering your butt. Now it's a statement to the world.
Right.
You know, I am the kind of person who wears X. And what that means is that even trivial choices become important because they all become statements of identity.
When Barry presented his research 15 years ago, dating wasn't on his radar at all. At that time, online dating was just getting started.
There was a study published before I wrote my book that involved speed dating, which was the precursor to social media. I don't know if you're even aware of what that is. You know, people get together and you spend 10 or 15 minutes talking to somebody, and then somebody blows a whistle and you move on and talk to the next somebody. And so a study was done of that, where on one occasion, I think you met 6 potential partners, and another occasion you met 12. And the finding was there were fewer matches made when you saw 12 people than when you saw 6 people, which is very counterintuitive.
It is.
But consistent with the notion that when you give people lots of options, you sit there wondering, you know, there's got to be something better out there, and you end up empty-handed.
Right.
I'm happy to report I'm not a participant in things like Tinder, but you know, when all you have to do is swipe, how good does your prospective partner have to be before you'll be interested? And the answer is unbelievably good.
Right.
So you end up, even if you make matches, there's an unwillingness to make anything like an enduring commitment, even to get to know the other person, let alone to actually pair up. because you know there are thousands of alternatives out there.
Are you suggesting, or would you suggest that the more choices a person has when dating, the less likely that person is to find love and happiness?
Well, not just find. Find is the misleading word. I think that you create it. And the problem with all this choice is that it creates this kind of attitude that it's something you have to find, right? Somewhere out there is the perfect person and I have to find that person. I think what happens is that relationships that start out on the basis of attraction that's pretty superficial become something else because they get created by the parties. That takes time, it takes work, it takes getting over occasional rough spots. And so the notion that your job is to create a meaningful and lasting relationship rather than find it changes everything. And I think this proliferation of options just convinces people that it's really about finding, not creating. The same thing is true with work. People want work that means something. The attitude that increasingly young people have is that involves finding your passion. And I think that's exactly the wrong attitude. You don't want to find your passion. You want to create a passion. That takes work, that takes time, that takes discipline, that takes sticking with something and trying to transform it rather than, swiping left and swiping right and seeing whether the next job or the next partner is going to be the perfect job or partner.
Okay, time for a little humble brag now. It feels pretty good to hear a world-famous psychologist backing up what I've been saying for years. There's just no such thing as the one who was made just for you. There's no soulmate out there waiting for you to find them. In every wedding sermon that I preach, I always say that these two people getting married today are not right for each other. And that's something that no bride or groom expects to hear on their wedding day, but it's true. No one ever marries the one. And the truth is, there's more than one person out there for all of us. My wife, I like to think, is reasonably happy in our marriage, but I'm not the only man in the world who could make her happy. And the same goes for me. A great marriage isn't about finding the best one. It's about finding one who's good enough and making it work together. And what we need is a paradigm shift when it comes to dating. Because the best relationships aren't just handed to us as a finished product. We have to work for them. If you're dating, that means instead of searching for God's great masterpiece, you're looking for someone who's a work in progress. You're looking for someone who's humble enough to be shaped by you and someone who's honest enough to shape you too. Because while it's true that your finished product isn't out there waiting for you to find them, it's also true that you're not someone else's finished product either. Not yet, anyway. You're not your dream date's dream date yet. So it's important, I think, that single people don't feel entitled to the best, and instead that they start looking for someone with the raw materials that are required to build an amazing relationship. I tried to push our groups of singles to adopt that way of thinking. And for the women in my church, one of the biggest deal breakers seems to be whether or not a guy that they're seeing is a Christian.
If a guy's not a Christian, are you out?
Yeah.
Really? Why?
Because I feel like it's just our belief system and how I'd want to raise my kids and stuff. It would just clash.
Okay. Maybe you could convert him.
Seems like a lot of work.
It is. Believe me. So I am faced with these situations all the time with people at church, right? It's usually young women. Sometimes it's young men that have met a girl that doesn't go to church. And they're like, what do I do? What should my priorities here be? And I think a good sign is if they're willing to come with you when you ask them to. Is there openness? Is there capacity for grace? Yeah. And what I mean by grace is somebody who feels empathy toward your priorities, your heart on this. Says, I can see this means a lot to you. Yeah, I'm happy to go twice a month or once a month or whatever. Like, that's a good sign.
One of the biggest deal breakers for men, especially men who are around 30 years old, seems to be a woman's age, and especially how quickly a woman wants to get serious about the future.
I was speaking to my mother about this. I bet you were. And she was trying to convince me to date some family friend that was 31, 32. And I just said, I don't know if I'm ready for that pace. Maybe they're in a different stage of life that want to get into things faster than I'm ready for. I don't know. I mean, I have dated girls that were older than me.
How old are you?
30. So it's not an automatic disqualification, and I just know I've got to decide quick. And like, if maybe I'm not as quick into the, immediately full-on dating and committed relationship, that she's not going to be into that. And so, you fast forward to like, well, they may want kids quicker than you do.
I do think that there is a common thread a lot of times, and this is not about you personally or anything, but I think that men would do well, especially men of faith, would do well to broaden our horizons a little bit in terms of seeing marriage as more than just about our fulfillment, but as an opportunity to fulfill others and serve a purpose, right? I'm not saying everybody needs to go out and find a single mom to marry, but if that opportunity presents itself, it shouldn't be a deal breaker.
Knowing what your deal breakers are is always important when dating. Healthy boundaries are never a bad idea. But lately I've been noticing how a person's deal breakers can create roadblocks to real love. Like when a woman says no to bald guys, for example. How many amazing bald guys is she missing out on? She's missing out on Jason Statham and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Seal is bald, and he was good enough for Heidi Klum. And on the other hand, men who say they're turned off by a woman who wants to have kids. It's like these men have forgotten how much fun it is to make a baby. Not to mention the fact that there is this beautiful woman in front of you who wants to give you the privilege of making a human with you. We can't let our deal breakers become self-defeating. And this is what Barry Schwartz is getting at when he distinguishes between people who are maximizers and those of us who are satisficers.
There are two broad classes of strategies you can take in making a decision about anything. One is to look for the best. And my colleagues and I call people who have that strategy maximizers. I want the best cereal, the best restaurant, the best vacation, the best job, the best romantic partner. If that's the attitude you have, the only way to know you've got the best is by looking at every option. And looking at every option has become impossible.
Right.
There are too many. The alternative is to look for a good enough option. You're looking for a good enough cereal, a good enough restaurant, a good enough place to go on vacation, and a good enough romantic partner. The difference between these two approaches is that if you're looking for good enough, you don't have to look at every option. You need to have some set of criteria. And as soon as you find something that satisfies those criteria, you stop looking.
And so you satisficers, right?
Satisficers, right. So you can turn an essentially infinitely large set of possibilities into a much smaller one because you don't need to look at all the candidates. You just need to look until you find somebody who's good enough. And what we find in our research is that the people who want the best typically do better when they're making decisions and feel worse about how they've done. They're always worried that they've missed something even better than what they've chosen. They're always worried about what they've given up in some of the alternatives that they've rejected. They have unrealistically high expectations about how good the thing they choose will be. And so when it's only very good instead of spectacular, they feel like somehow they've made a mistake. And I certainly think this is true when it comes to intimate relations. If you think you've done okay, but you could do better, you're always going to be looking over your partner's shoulder in case that somebody better happens to be walking by.
A lot of people hear satisficers and think that it sounds like settling. Like, here's Eric Huffman telling me to settle for whatever man or woman the cat might drag in. But that's not it. Being a satisficer means being realistic about romance. It's knowing that even though there's always going to be somebody out there who's better looking or taller or richer or more nurturing than the one you're with, it doesn't matter. Because you and this one person have both made the choice to love each other and only each other and to love each other toward your God-given potential. And some days, of course, it would be easier to walk out the door and find someone better. But real love is always worth the hard work and sacrifice. From my experience, satisficers are generally happier and healthier than maximizers, who are perpetually miserable because no matter who or what they have, it's never enough. Still, I recognize that being a satisficer isn't easy, especially in a choice-driven consumer society that tells you never to settle for anything but the best. Barry thinks the only solution for meaningful dating in such a society is to find a way to impose limits on yourself. I was really surprised when he brought up the value of limits that are imposed within some religious communities. Barry was raised Jewish, and even though he's not observant today, he admits that religion can help people learn to set healthy limits.
All the religious practices that I know about impose constraints on people. And those constraints can really be frustrating in a world where options are limited. But in a world where options are unlimited, I think these constraints save people. I have a good friend who's an academic like I am, and he started observing the Sabbath, which requires that you stop working at sundown on Friday and don't do any work until sundown on Saturday. And he started observing the Sabbath because, as you may know, there's no limit to how much work an academic can do.
Absolutely.
And he found that there was no way he could limit his work encroaching on the rest of his life if he was simply making a series of decisions, like, is this important enough for me to do it on a Saturday afternoon, or can it wait? And so he decided that the only way to seek and maintain balance in his life would be to have an ironclad rule that there was nothing important enough to disrupt his observation of the Sabbath. And he found this constraint liberating. And I think a lot of the constraints that religious institutions impose in the current world liberate people rather than confining them. Now, this will not be true of all people, and it will certainly not be true of all constraints. But I think people now are hungry for limits more than they are inclined to rebel against them.
At one point during my conversation with the group of single men from my church, I mentioned that in the old days, a pastor like me would set people up with a potential spouse. They all laughed, but for a moment, I think I saw a glimmer of hope in their eyes. I think they half expected that a line of women would parade in at any moment, that they'd be matched up together. And I sensed that maybe that would have been a welcome relief. Both groups I met with, the men and the women, seemed fed up with dating. And whether or not they admit it, they're probably exhausted by the infinite wealth of choices that online dating has afforded them. Because the more options they have, the less likely they are ever going to invest in one person. And that's terrifying to people who've always imagined themselves getting married, having children, and even growing old with their one and only. Actress Zuzanna Szadkowski did eventually settle down in a healthy relationship, and it was one that she created, first by looking inward and working on herself.
How do you get to the place where you decided that you weren't going to ignore these red flags anymore and you weren't going to be a lifeboat for people anymore?
I started to see that I had not prioritized love, connection, relationship, partnership in my life, that I had been very single-minded about my acting career. And the fact that I started meeting all these crazy, disrespectful bad guys is really honestly about me, because I don't feel like I deserve better or could get better, which is really a reflection of my relationship to myself and the fact that I somehow really believe in myself as an actor. I really believe in myself as a friend. I've never suffered from low self-esteem in any kind of particular way, but I feel like in this romantic context, all of a sudden, all of my insecurities come out, and it's like I'm not a valuable person, and that's the place I was working from.
Zuzanna opened up to her close friend, Katie Rose, about these relationships with James and Carlos. She told Katie,
I can't have a guy who's deceitful, who doesn't have his stuff together first, who doesn't have anything to offer me, who isn't listening to me or wanting to, like, you know, that in our relationship, it's not about something magical is happening between us. It's just that they need something from me more than they want something from me.
And Katie Rose advised her,
rather than coming from a place of negativity, perhaps I should reframe that and think about what it is that I want to have, and to like put that on a piece of paper or like put it in the world so that it can be like a real thing.
So 3 years ago, Zuzanna sat down in her one-windowed Brooklyn Heights apartment and wrote a list of her expectations for the men she dates. I asked her to dig up that old list.
My guy will be ... And I said, a real man. I don't know exactly what I meant by that. Accomplished in his field, thriving, sexy and substantial with man hands. That's my one physical attribute. Funny, social. I want this man to dote on me physically. I want heat. I want to be the one person that is in his life. I want to be respected. I want to be told the truth. I want a meeting of wits and souls and humor. I want him to like my dog, to go to brunches and do neighborhood stuff. I want to be taken out, treated, and cared for sometimes. That's my list.
And did you find that guy?
Yeah, I totally did.
Zuzanna matched with Damon on Tinder too, and it was love at first sight for her when they met for the first time at a dive bar in Midtown Manhattan. But as they started to date, she realized he was not meeting her expectations for how she wanted to be treated. So she ended their relationship. Damon ended up moving away for a year, and when he came back, he was ready to be the boyfriend she believed she deserved.
Baby, you were right and I was wrong. This love.
I actually had like a really good Tinder story, but I wouldn't have had it if it wasn't for some sort of conscious behavior that I had to expect of myself. I wouldn't have the relationship I have now with him if I hadn't sort of demanded excellence in this part of my life the way that I demand it, you know, from my friends and my family and my work and the rest of everything. I definitely really consciously learned something from James and the other Tinder nightmares. I applied it here, and now I have this part of my life starting to look really good.
At first glance, Zuzanna's story might seem to contradict the advice of Barry Schwartz. Which is it? Should we be super choosy and wait for the right person, or should we be okay with someone who's just good enough? But if you listen closely to Zuzanna's story, you heard her say two very important things about Damon. First, even though he looked like the one in the beginning, he wasn't ready to be the kind of man she was looking for, so she let him go, without fear of losing him and without fawning over him. And then, after waiting a year, he came back. And here's the key. Even though Zuzanna had already decided that Damon wasn't perfect for her, she was willing to give him another chance. And when Damon demonstrated to her that he was willing to change, that was all she needed to know. He wasn't perfect, but he was good enough, and he was willing to try and become an even better man. Obviously, some stories don't end like Zuzanna's. Many 30 and 40-something women in my church are left asking, why? Why, God? Why can't I have the husband and family that I want? And some men are in the same position, wondering why they haven't found the one. And there's a lot of real pain going on there. In part 2 of this episode, we're going to bring God into this conversation. And we'll hear the amazing story of a young, single woman who has overcome some incredible obstacles on her path toward healing and wholeness. And somehow along the way, she found the love of her life. And believe me, it's not what it sounds like. For me, her story touches on what I think is the most important message singles need to hear. Part 2 will be dropping very soon, so be sure to check back. As always, thanks for listening to Maybe God.
This episode of Maybe God was produced by Julie Murley-Coultois and Eric Huffman. Nathan Bonus and Aubrey Snyder are the sound engineers, and our editors are Shannon Steffen, Brittany Holland, and Justin Mayer. For more information or to tell us what you think, head to our website, maybegodpod.com.